So Erice is one of those servants that's really divisive because you either think that she's like one of the best free-to-play servants to have ever come out, you either think she's complete dookie dog water, or you're kind of like me and you're like, well, I mean, she's a little wonky, but she's definitely still usable. You can get some mileage out of her, definitely. And for the low price of just a couple laps around the game board, you too can also have this free-to-play servant, and then kind of decide for yourself if you think she's even worth using. Now, we're going to do what we always do. We're going to break this servant down in today's video, and then after I give you all the facts, maybe you play around with her a little bit in the Fate Requiem event, and then you can kind of come to your own conclusion on how good she is. But she's definitely not as broken as some of the other god tier free-to-play servants. You know, people like Kentucky Rider, Chloe, Sieg. She is really not on their level, but she is decent at the very least. Before we begin, make sure you leave a like on the video, subscribe to the channel. We are trying to hit 100k, and we are within sniffing distance of 20k. So if you think about it, we're about a fifth of the way there, and you can help by clicking that like and that subscribe button. Also, if you want more content, I stream every weekday over on my Twitch, linked down in the description down below. With all that being said though, let's go ahead and dive right into this servant, starting off with her hits, which, as far as hits are concerned, she is pretty average. Her NP gain is slightly above average at 0.63%, and her arts hits are pretty solid at 3 apiece, meaning you can refund some decent NP with her arts cards, more so if you're getting crits. She does have a bit of star jetting capability because she has 12% star gen with 2 4-hit quick cards, which is pretty strong, as well as having a passive 7% buff for those quick cards, meaning you can actually get her to drop a bit of stars when she does a Brave Chain, especially if it's a Brave Chain involving both of her quick cards, in which case you can follow up with some crits on the arts cards for massive NP gain. But really, aside from that, there's nothing really else of note on this servant. I mean, she does have that 5-hit extra attack, which is absolutely broken if she had higher NP gain. Because if you don't know, the extra attack is a composite card that gens stars NP and does big boy damage, but unlike the other cards, it cannot crit, so not really going to be taking advantage of the NP gaining abilities of that extra attack, but maybe you could drop a couple extra stars with it if you get lucky to do a Brave Chain. Now, let's move into the skills of this servant, because honestly, when you start looking at Erice and everything that she does, from her skills to most of her NP, everything looks really, really strong. There's just one, I would say, glaring flaw in her NP that makes people hate her so much. But as we start going into her skills, starting off with skill 1, you'll notice this is a very, very strong skill. She is getting a 30% arts buff for 3 turns, as well as 2 hits of evasion that last for 3 turns on a 6-turn cooldown. Usually we don't like to combine the defensive skills and the offensive skills, but for one, the offenses last for 3 turns, and the defensive skill also lasts for 3 turns as well, meaning if you pop this because you want to go ahead and use Erice's NP, or you're trying to buff the NP gain of her arts cards because this is buffing the arts performance and is going to do that, you're not going to waste the dodges here, right? Unless the enemies just all spurg out and attack Erice right then and there, then maybe, yeah, you'll lose your dodges. But the point of making them hit-based and making them last for 3 turns is that you don't waste either half of this skill, because there's a lot of servants like Raiko or Jack, for instance, that have a dodge that only lasts for 1 turn on top of their mana burst, which is a massive part of their ability to do damage that also only lasts 1 turn. And it can be really annoying to balance whether or not you want to use the skill for damage or defense, right? So Erice, you really shouldn't be having to deal with that, and both of these buffs are rather solid. Then you move over to her second skill. This isn't as crazy, it's just a bit of utility that they're giving her. She is able to pierce evasion for 1 turn, which is very nice. That means she can bypass any enemy dodges. If you're struggling with that William Tell boss fight in Lost Belt 4, you can bring Erice as a free-to-play servant in there now, and she can beat him up. And then she also gets some decent star weight for 1 turn, which, again, as I was saying, she can drop a fair bit of stars for herself if you get lucky in a Brave Chain, so then you can use this to absorb all of those stars, hopefully get them on the arts cards, and get some massive NP gaining going on. And do also keep in mind that even though these only last for 1 turn, the skill is on a low cooldown of 4, meaning you will actually be seeing this pretty often, as it'll only be down for 3 turns, so just keep that in mind, that you're not like losing this skill for 5 turns or something. It should be something you could pop with some regularity. Finally, there's her third skill, which just kind of brings a whole lot of good stuff, but also starts to lead a little bit into the problem. So she's buffing her own instant kill success rate by 100% for 3 turns, which Sure, that's great. That's going to help her mop up some trash mobs. You know, you can insta-kill some bronze enemies, maybe some silver enemies if you get really lucky. But then she's also giving herself 30% crit damage for 3 turns, meaning that even though she can drop a couple stars for herself, she can now give them a little bit of bite by buffing up her crit damage. And then she also gives herself just one of the more insane damage mods in the game. She just gets 30% free damage against servants for 3 turns, which makes her really good for farming in the sense that there's usually always a servant on the 3rd wave of every farming node, and it means that even at NP5 as a free-to-play servant, her damage can be a little lacking, it means that it should give her that last little bit of gas to close out any farming node. So in theory, you look at the skills, you're like, she's got an arts buff to kind of help her loop and do damage. When you get to the 3rd wave, that arts buff is going to multiply into that special damage mod against servants because different damage types in FGO are actually multiplicative, they're not additive. She has some crits that she can get for some boss fights, she can clear trash mobs with the insta-kill. It's just a lot of really good stuff. I like what I'm seeing. Well, we go over to the NP, and this is where things start to fall apart. I mean, the initial effect, where she removes all enemy defensive buffs, not before she attacks, unfortunately, because that would make her really broken, but still very good for boss battles because you can use this to remove all of the enemy's defensive buffs, and then you can follow it up with another DPS servant or with Erice's own face cards if you have crits on them. You know, you can remove all the defensive buffs like they're just stacks of defense, damage cut, invincibility, stuff like that. Very, very solid. The problem is right here on the Overcharge. This is pretty much what sours Erice for a lot of people. She has a 30 to 80% chance to insta-kill all enemies, and it procs first. Now, here's the reason that's a really, really big deal, because since she can insta-kill the enemies, it means she actually doesn't hit them with her NP. The reason that's a big deal is that refunding NPs are based solely on getting hits. You have to connect and hit the enemy to get that NP refund, and since she can insta-kill those people before she actually hits them, it can mean that in theory, your Erice either refunds very little NP because she only hit, say, 1 person in the node, maybe 2 persons in the node, or she just doesn't get anything back at all whatsoever because she insta-killed everybody. And this pretty much soured everything for everyone that wanted to use her as a farmer, because if you can imagine, literally just take the activates first on Overcharge and put it on the removes their defensive buffs. Just swap those around and then she would be absolutely broken. Because if it was the inverse way, not only would she remove all enemies' defensive buffs, but then let's say you're doing some farming and one of those enemies, you get a low roll for your damage, because if you don't know, in FGO, there are low and high rolls for damage, so your damage can vary a little bit. I'm sure you guys have noticed that when farming. But let's say you get a low roll and you don't end up actually taking out the enemy, you could still get that insta-kill chance. Maybe they were like a silver enemy and you managed to get that kill. The other thing is that this really wouldn't be that much of a problem if it wasn't for Erice's 3rd skill buffing up her insta-kill chance, right? Thankfully, you really don't have to use the 3rd skill until you're on the 3rd wave for farming, because that's where most of the servant enemies are going to be. They're going to be in that last 3rd wave, but you can still get some very unfortunate runs that just get completely obliterated because Erice took the time to insta-kill somebody, right? So that's kind of where the whole debate comes from. It's like, well, it's only like a 30% chance to insta-kill them. Enemies have their own insta-kill resistance, although if they're bronze enemies, that insta-kill resistance is not going to be very high, and it can be very frustrating when you make like 10 different attempts to try to farm a node, and she keeps insta-killing one of the people there, right? It can be very, very annoying, but she is not unusable, especially if you're a newer player and you just don't have a whole lot of options, and you're like, well, I really just want to use this Erice because I don't have a better Lancer to use. I mean, if you look at Arts AoE Lancers, they're not exactly the most accessible group of people. You have Ryoma Lancer, who's going to come out in like 2 years. Vitra, who comes out later on this year. It's kind of like if you don't get her, you don't get her. Lancer Melt, who is really, really good, but is exclusive to the summer event. Percival, who's not going to be out for like another year and a half. Fion, who's actually pretty good, but nobody wants to use him for some reason. I mean, he's actually just a good servant. And then Mary Anning, who is technically free to play because she's a 1-star servant and is really good, But she's also a limited 1-star servant, so it's like you gotta get her in 2 years when the event comes out, and if you don't roll the friend point gacha and get her while she's out, you miss out on her. She's very similar to someone like Nobukatsu, where he's like this limited 1-star servant. So she can fill a void in your account, and if you bring her to challenge quests, you literally don't care about the insta-kill thing, right? It doesn't affect you really at all, aside from like getting refund here and there to do subsequent NPs, but it's far less intrusive in challenge quests, right? Can still be annoying, but far less intrusive. It's just a lot of this comes from we were really looking forward to the servant to being a really good farming option, and they put that little just blemish on the servant. It's like, oh, we were so close to perfection. But let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. Let me know what you guys think of Erice. Do you think she's absolute dookie dog water? Do you think she's really good? Or are you kind of like me where it's like, well, you can get some really good use out of her, but if you have better options, you probably won't end up using her. Not like Kentucky Rider, Chloe, or Sieg, who are going to be some of your first choices when you want to use somebody that fits whatever role that they're in, right? Single target rider, single target archer, loop-de-loop caster, right? Or like someone like Shiki, right? To just burst down a boss. People like that are like your go-tos. But let me know all that in the comments down below. Remember to like and subscribe to help your boy hit 100K. Come out to the streams, link down in the description down below, every weekday. And if you want to support the channel, you can click that join button to become a channel member, which also gives you channel member exclusive content. And you could download LD Emulator linked down in the description down below. Through my link, it's a very good way to play FGO or really any mobile game on your computer, and I use it myself for both of my accounts. So, you know, I trust the product. But with all that being said, I'm going to go ahead and get out of here. You guys have yourselves a nice day. Peace, late guys.